Picture this. You are at a party, a work event, or a family gathering. Someone walks up to you, smiles warmly, and says, "So crazy weather lately, right?" And something inside you just deflates. Not because you dislike that person, not because you are in a bad mood, but because within 3 seconds, some part of your brain has already quietly calculated that this conversation is going nowhere, and the cost of getting through it is going to be higher than it looks. If that resonates with you, stay with this, because what most people call being bad at small talk is actually something far more specific, far more psychological, and far more interesting than a simple social flaw. Here's the question that nobody really asks. What if the problem is not the person who gets bored, but the conversation itself? Now, before we go further, this is not a video about dismissing people or deciding you are too interesting for basic human interaction. This is about understanding why certain minds genuinely struggle with surface-level conversation in a way that others simply do not. And the answer, it turns out, starts deep inside the brain. Neuroscientists who study motivation and reward have long understood that dopamine, the brain's primary reward chemical, does not release at the same rate in all people. For some individuals, the threshold required to trigger a meaningful dopamine response is significantly higher than average. This means that a conversation about weekend plans, the traffic, or what someone had for lunch does not just feel uninteresting to these people. It is, on a chemical level, genuinely unrewarding. The brain is spending real energy, attention, social processing, emotional performance, and receiving almost nothing back. Psychologists Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who spent decades studying optimal human experience, describe this as a mismatch between challenge and capacity. When the stimulus is too far below a person's processing level, the result is not relaxation, it is drain. Boredom is not passive. It is actually a form of low-grade suffering, the brain reaching for something to engage with and finding nothing. So when someone with a high stimulation threshold walks away from a cocktail party feeling inexplicably exhausted, they are not being dramatic. Their brain did a significant amount of work and came back empty-handed. But here is where it gets more layered. Because not everyone who struggles with small talk struggles for the same reason. There are actually several distinct psychological types here, and understanding which one you recognize yourself in changes everything. The first group are what we might call the deep processors. These are people who score extremely high in what psychologists call openness to experience. One of the 5 core personality dimensions identified in decades of personality research. High openness individuals are driven by intellectual curiosity, abstract thinking, and a near constant appetite for meaning. They are the people who, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, find themselves thinking about the nature of consciousness or the specific feeling of a memory from 12 years ago, or whether free will is coherent. For them, small talk is not just boring. It is a specific kind of frustration, like being handed a children's puzzle when your mind was already working on something else entirely. A sentiment that has circulated widely online captures this almost perfectly. I don't care what you do for a living. I want to know what keeps you awake at 3 a.m. That is not social arrogance. That is a deep processor expressing the only kind of conversation that actually reaches them. The second group experiences this differently. They are not necessarily philosophical by nature. They are, instead, what researchers and clinicians often call highly sensitive people, a term formalized by psychologists Elaine Aron, whose research identified that roughly 15 to 20% of the population processes sensory and emotional information at a significantly deeper level than average. For highly sensitive people, social environments are already high in stimulation. A crowded room, fluorescent lighting, multiple conversations happening at once. Their nervous system is already working hard just to be present. Small talk, for this group, adds an additional cognitive layer. The performance of warmth and engagement, they do not currently have the bandwidth to genuinely feel. They smile, nod, ask the follow-up question, maintain appropriate eye contact, and the whole time, some part of their nervous system is quietly screaming. When they finally get home and feel that overwhelming wave of relief, it is not introversion. In the simple popular sense, it is a system that finally gets to stop performing. Then there is a third group, and this one is not always talked about, but it is psychologically important. These are the people for whom small talk does not just feel dull, it feels, on some level, unsafe. This might sound extreme, so stay with the psychology here for a moment. For individuals who grew up in emotionally unpredictable environments where a person's mood could shift without warning, where pleasantness on the surface did not guarantee safety underneath, the brain learned to be suspicious of performance. It learned that a smiling face and a pleasant conversation could coexist with something hidden and potentially harmful. As adults, these individuals carry that calibration into social spaces. A perfectly smooth, perfectly agreeable, surface-level interaction does not read as friendly to their nervous system. It reads as unreadable. They cannot assess a person until they see something real, a genuine opinion, a moment of vulnerability, an honest reaction that was not filtered for social approval. Small talk, in this framework, is not just hollow. It is a wall, and being kept on the other side of it feels like a kind of low-level exclusion. Psychologist and researcher Brené Brown spent years studying vulnerability and connection and arrived at a conclusion that is relevant here. Genuine connection cannot exist in the absence of authenticity. For this third group, that is not a philosophical preference. It is a felt, embodied truth their nervous system enforces without asking for permission. Now here's the part that most people misunderstand, including people in these groups themselves. This is not the same thing as being antisocial. Many people who are profoundly bored by small talk are in the right conversation, among the most engaging, warm, and present people you will ever speak with. The issue is not the socializing. The issue is the specific ritual of surface-level exchange that modern social life treats as the mandatory entry point to all human connection. Think about the architecture of a typical social event. You start with the weather. Then you move to jobs. Then you acknowledge mutual acquaintances. Then, if everything goes well, you might eventually reach something that actually matters. The people we are talking about in this video experience that process as an almost physical ordeal. Not because the other person is unworthy, but because they are genuinely asking their mind to idle, when it only knows how to run dot. And there is another dimension here that deserves to be named clearly: time. People who have rich interior lives, vivid imaginations, complex thought patterns, deep engagement with ideas or creative work experience idle time differently than most. Pulling their attention away from their internal world into an external conversation requires the external conversation to be worth the interruption. When it is not, the resentment is not really about the other person. It is the specific frustration of being asked to give your most finite resource-focused attention for zero return. So what do you do with all of this? The honest answer is that this pattern does not fully resolve. If your brain is wired for depth, it is not going to start finding whether conversations chemically rewarding, but understanding the mechanism changes the emotional weight you carry around it. If you have spent years quietly believing you are antisocial, cold, or incapable of normal human connection, consider the possibility that none of that was ever true. Consider that you were simply someone who walked into rooms with a high threshold for genuine engagement, in a world that has decided the opening bid for human connection should always be something nobody actually cares about. The people who find you hard to read, who find you quiet at parties, who wonder why you seem uninterested, they are not wrong to notice, but they are probably misinterpreting what they are seeing. You are not absent, you are waiting. You are waiting for the conversation to become something that makes the exchange feel mutual. And when that conversation finally happens, when someone says something honest, something unexpected, something that reveals a real interior, you are probably one of the most fully present people in the room. That is not a flaw. That is a very specific kind of loyalty to genuine human connection, the kind that refuses to be satisfied with the imitation of it. If any part of this felt like something you have been trying to find words for, leave a comment below. Tell me what kind of conversation actually reaches you. And if someone in your life is like this, someone who goes quiet in groups but comes alive in the right conversation, share this with them. Sometimes the most valuable thing is simply knowing that the way your mind works has a name.